Hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at. We're glad to have each and every person join us today on our last in our series of the summer webinar series, the Keeping It Cool with Reliability. We're excited today to have my dad present some stuff here on time waveform analysis. He's been around the industry for a little while, has a little bit of knowledge and really good at articulating that very well. So we're excited to have you today, Dad. So if you want to go ahead and get kicked off.
Yes, sir. Thank you, David. And we'll get going. We're going to be talking about something today which is I'm greatly passionate about, time waveform analysis of, in fact, rotating machinery. And I'm going to first go over the agenda with you. We're going to be looking at time waveforms and what in the world is a time waveform? What do they look like? We'll also be looking at vibration sensors and pointing out the fact that they always measure time waveforms, not spectra, okay? So this spectrum itself can be calculated from the time waveform for all measurements. They could be vibration measurements or noise, ultrasound, pressure, etc. So this includes not only walk around routes that are being done for 30 or 40 years now, but also includes data received from wireless vibration sensors. So the question we're going to have today is, why measure time waveforms? Well, and the real question is, what does a vibration waveform reveal that a spectrum does not? So we'll look at that in a few moments. But the whole reason we're looking at time waveform analysis today, many problems are false and only be detected by time waveforms. And that's a biggie. So we'll learn today in this webinar today, which problems or faulty conditions are we talking about that can only be detected by time waveforms. And by the way, before I go much further, I had to learn this myself. At one point, I thought vibration spectra, amplitude versus frequency, could detect everything in the way of rotating machinery problems. I really thought vibration spectra could do it. But unfortunately, I found some gear problems and some bearing problems, and I'll get in some others in a few moments that could not be detected. Couldn't even see a problem. So I had to resort to time waveforms to even pick up the problem. So we'll look at some important statistics as we just begin this webinar that we've learned by surveying reliability programs throughout the nation. And one of the things is that 95% of beginning vibration analysts don't know what problems are missed by spectra. And that's maybe not a big surprise, but 90%, get this, 90% of vibration reliability programs, those programs that include vibration, don't even save and store the time waveforms. Whoa. And get this, only 5 to 10%, approximately 5 to 10% of experienced vibration analysts even know how to specify to specify time waveforms themselves, the measurement spectra, the measurement setups, and so forth, and how to detect these the wide array of machine faults by evaluating the time waveforms. Now, why is this, and why was this? So let's look at this. When it comes to time waveforms, only limited information was and is available in time waveform analysis. When we first looked at time waveform analysis ourselves, around 1990, 1991, because we had to, all right? Then we started asking questions. We started looking for information. Where's time waveform analysis? Where can I learn more about it? Couldn't find it. So we started doing it ourselves. We started learning more and more and more. And as time went by, we learned that, hey, let's go, when we have vibration problems or ultrasound problems that are required primarily for rotating machinery, let's go and use this time waveform analysis, right? And also with gas pressure analysis, when we're looking at pumps or reciprocating machinery, let's look at those, all right? Let's use the time waveform on them as well. And then as time passed, we learned more and more about it. We learned how to set up the waveform properly. I said properly. And we also learned that, hey, there's certain things we're never going to see if we don't look at the time waveform. So we're going to include not only reveal what things cannot be detected without the time waveform, but also we're going to be looking at case studies. And this will be right from our own time waveform analysis seminar book, which we'll be holding the next one, but the next time waveform analysis seminar will be November 5 through 7 this year here in Charlotte. And a few moments there at the end of the presentation today, we'll look at what other seminars might be available and so forth. I'm talking about just time waveform, right? That's going to be occurring. And also for any further information about the seminars and so forth, you can contact our Jenny Rabasa at this particular email address, or you can go to the seminar tab on our website. All right. So today, the key point I want to introduce is we're going to whet your appetite. We want to only introduce you to time waveforms. We don't expect you to know how to analyze them or even how to set them up, but we want you to just pay attention, sit back, relax, and listen closely. All right. So let's first off look at this. We're looking at a spectrum over here, okay? And we're looking at a time waveform here. Now, which is easiest to see? Well, the frequency domain, the spectra, amplitude versus frequency, all right? Amplitude, frequency going this way, amplitude going up. The higher the amplitude, the worse, typically the worse the problem, all right? Over here, the same thing, amplitude again, but now instead of frequency, cycles per second, cycles per minute, hertz, etc., orders even. Look at the time domain, and the time domain looks at amplitude versus time, as its name says. Now, here's a question. Where does the spectrum come from? Well, it comes from the waveform. So the spectrum itself is never measured by an analyzer of any kind. No matter whose analyzer it is, they all measure time domains, all right? And you look at this, which is more complicated in the time domain, and after the time domain is measured by the analyzer, then through mathematics, it will then calculate. It will then calculate through fast Fourier transform, FFT, through the FFT, it will come up with a spectrum of amplitude versus time. And yes, that's easier to see. It's easier to evaluate. But we're going to look at the waveform today, and we'll look at the real-world examples of it in a few moments, right? And this will, by the way, it will include frequencies within the waveform. It actually includes amplitude versus time. They're called spikes. Over in the frequency domain, we call them peaks. In the time domain, we call them spikes, right? So now we're going to look at, there's two different views. One view is from this case, the time domain. The other is the frequency domain. So there's two of these views. Which one do you need? Which view? How about both spectrum and waveform? And it's our strong recommendation that at each and every point that you store not only the spectrum, but that you likewise store the waveform. And we'll find out why in a few moments. Now look at this at a snapshot. This is a time block. Oh, that's a strange sounding word. We're looking at a waveform right here. And no, it's not easy to evaluate at this point. That's why we have a seminar for 3 days that teaches how to evaluate, how to set up a spectrum, how to set up a waveform, and how to evaluate them once you've done so. Now, looking at this time block, if you look at this from here to here, okay, from the beginning of this block to the end of the block, the time waveform is measured by the sensor and the analyzer, right? And the time window itself goes from this point to this point. That is, it's how long this time window takes, and the more the number of points that we're going to capture, then the better will be the waveform. And we'll get into that in a few moments. Right now, I just want to bring up one very important point. When you're looking at something in the field, and even if you're just running a route, even if you're looking at something from a wireless sensor, it's best, if you would, to look at not only the spectrum, but also the waveform. And you want to see if it's a steady state. That is this waveforms remaining the same before and during the window and after you've looked at the waveform? Is it remaining the same? Or is it in fact going crazy after in a few seconds and then it passes? And then crazy over here and it passes? Well, in that case, it's going to take a special diagnostic. But most all the time, we're going to see things that are remaining what we call steady state. Okay, so it's remaining essentially the same. Hit the store button and move on. All right, vibration measured in 3D. This is something that was brought up by Robert Scarrick about 4 weeks ago in our number 2 summer webinar series. And he brought up a really good point. He had amplitude versus frequency. That's our spectrum. But he brought up one other thing, the sampling frequency. Why is that important? Because you need a sampling frequency, and that has to be correctly done in order to truly capture meaningful spectra, for that matter, but also truly meaningful waveforms. And he pointed out that if as you go higher in frequency, you're getting a higher frequency. What does that do? It gives you better and better results. Depending on what you're looking for, it doesn't always give you better results, but it gives you better results if you're looking in the time domain for sure. All right. Also in amplitude. All right. So inadequate if you only look at a very low Fmax, maximum frequency from here to there. is your maximum frequency. Now, as we go to a higher frequency and amplitude for that matter, and for that matter, sampling frequency, come out in this direction. All right. Now you're up to poor. Then you go to good. Then you go to optimum. So what's optimum? How are we going to know we've got it optimum? Well, we're going to look at measurement specs. They're taught in the time waveform seminar, but the fact is, well, how high does this something called the sampling frequency need to go? Well, let's take it as a next example. What, in fact, is a sampling frequency? First off, a measurement taking place, and I'm looking at an accelerometer right now, and it's going to measure something, and I'm going to let you see this again. You see these red dots coming in, all right? As they're coming in, we're seeing the more of the dots, the better. That's what we're seeing here, the more of the samples. Each time one of these dots populates the screen, then it's creating a time waveform. So if we only have, let's say that we took a sample here, and then we didn't take another sample until right here, another one here, another one there. What we'd have, our time waveform would be this guy right here, the straight line. It would be meaningless. So you need this one and this one and this one and this one in order to draw a fairly good looking waveform, but you need all these to draw a very complicated looking waveform, which you see in the real world many, many times. In fact, most of the time. It takes a lot of samples. That's up to the analyzer. You tell it what you want to take, and that's where we get into the class thing, which I'm not going to do today, but just taking one thing. The more of the dots, the better. All right. Now, looking at a spectrum down below, then we'll see that it has a maximum frequency. So it has peaks that are in here, some that are larger than others. It has a maximum frequency. This determines how close the samples are taken in the waveform. All right. It's not the more of the lines. If you've worked with spectra for a long time, you think, well, the more of the lines, yes, the better the spectrum. But the more of the lines has no effect at all. No effect at all on the waveform itself. It doesn't alter it at all by adding more lines. So one of the things that comes to, let's remember this little equation. Sampling frequency is 2.56 times F max. And I'll go over that in just a moment. Sampling frequency is 2.56 times F max. Is there any other variable in there? That's it. It's F max, not the number of lines, nothing else, just the F max. All right. So let's look at a sampling rate. Here's something else that Robert brought out a few weeks ago. If you don't sample the data as rapidly as a faulty event occurs, you will, at a minimum, underestimate the severity by a huge factor, or even worse. So the machine may fail without warning, and then you run into big dollars. We've got one of those coming up in our case studies. You may even be aware of a developing defect and still get a call in the middle of the night. And what the problem is that your reliability program loses credibility. So let's look at some real world data. This is actually data that we captured on a great number of machines that had themselves severe faults. We'd already proven they have severe faults. So we ran some controlled tests. There's a lot of data here, and I won't expect you to go through all this data at this point, but I do want to point out one thing, the sampling frequency right in here, all right? Here's the F max, and let's say it's 10,000 hertz, all right? If it's 10,000 hertz, 10,000 times 2.56. Remember that guy? 10,000 times 2.56. The sampling frequency is 25,600 hertz. And right now, you're probably going, what is he talking about? It's going to make a little sense as we go a little further. Just right now, that's the sampling frequency and how it's calculated. That's all we need to know at this point. All right. Now, let's look at the same data, but now we're going to just forget anything higher the frequency than 1,000, 2,000 hertz. Why is that? Well, we've done a survey of reliability programs all over, as we told you. We asked a lot of questions when we did this. One of the questions we ask is, what is your maximum frequency that you take for your routes? And the answers typically are falling in most all cases, around 92% came back with 1,000 hertz or 2,000 hertz. In CPM, that's multiplied by 60,000 CPM or 120,000 CPM. There's your F max. Okay, with that F max, what are we seeing? What are we seeing in there? Well, these machines, they all have severe faults. And what we ended up getting was the average. We took the average of all the waveforms, right, that we saw from all the different machines and averaged those in this particular column, right? And for when we were set at 1,000 hertz, which let's just call it 60,000 CPM or 120,000 CPM, we came up with, say, 6 to 9 Gs. Now, is that good or bad? Well, Well, the problems that for which we were looking, because we know they're severe, it indicated they were in good condition. Whoa, the machine's in good condition. Can you believe that? Well, let's see. Let's go back and look at this higher maximum frequency. As we go to it, now we're seeing the 10,000 hertz. That is 600,000 CPM. This is what we would require to truly look at a waveform, to truly look at a meaningful waveform, and looking for it not only in terms of amplitude, but also in terms of the time waveform shape. Now, shape doesn't mean a lot to you maybe at this point. We're going to look and show you some real world data, and it will, in fact, mean a lot to you when you see it. So let's look at the amplitude first. 26 Gs versus 6 Gs. Not good. So if you take more and more, if you take your 10,000 hertz, what we did was we knew there was a real problem. We took one sample of data at 10,000 hertz. We took another sample at 5,000 hertz, 3,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, 1,000 hertz. And as we did that, well, the amplitude got smaller, smaller, and smaller. The problem went away. Or did it? The problems are still there, right? What we did was we went with the amplitude, and the amplitude dropped by a tremendous amount. So therefore, if you looked at this 60,000 CPM F max, 1,000 hertz, we looked at 6.4 Gs. You looked up here and it's 26.2 Gs. That is 4 times higher amplitude in reality than we were seeing. 4 times higher. Wow. Does it make a difference where your F max is? Absolutely. In terms of amplitude and shape. So the summary of results, what do we find in this whole thing? Well, you can have a lot of damage and yet miss it. Even experienced analysts don't know this. I didn't know this. I did not know this. But I was one of those guys taking 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz F max. And guess what? I was missing some big guys in terms of amplitude. Now you can still take a small F max for your spectrum. That's just absolutely fine. But when you go to take your time waveform, all right, then you want to separate the issue. So you want a high F max for it, a high F max. So I'll let you see the true amplitude and shape. All right. So let's look at what are the faults that are missed by spectra only that the waveforms see, time waveforms see. And we can go through this whole thing, but time, we only have 25, 30 minutes here. So look at all these things that are listed on the left side. These are problems that are only detectable by time waveforms, not by spectral analysis alone. On the right are those for which time waveforms give confirming evidence to something the spectrum already detected. All right. Now let's look at today. Just 3 problems. These are 3 big problems. If you have gear problems, if you have roll nut bearing problems, okay, for 5 to 60 RPM in particular, very low speed machines, and also for lubrication faults, all right, especially when you have deficient oil. Look at just those 3 today in our case studies and what we're looking at right now. This is from our diagnostic chart, which you may be able to see behind me, that we've had up for 34 years. And in it has something very important, gears that have cracked, chipped, or broken teeth. And if you look at them, this is one of the guys that really jumps off the page. For if you don't take a time waveform, forget it. You will not see the problem with the cracked or broken tooth. I had to learn that by the School of Hard Knocks by missing gear problems that I mentioned before, wondering why they failed. And I was very embarrassed, and it cost big time dollars. But I didn't know any better, right? So that's why we're trying to get the point out today to you and in our time waveform analysis seminar, right? So, and something else I just mentioned, I said a cracked tooth. That cracked tooth, here we've got a pinion, and there we've got a bull gear, right? So the bull gear is turning at a lower speed than the high-speed pinion. Well, if you have a cracked tooth, how do you know if it's in one guy or the other? Well, if you look at the time waveform, then you'll find out. You will not find it from the spectrum. Now let's look at what would you see in the time waveform? These abrupt impact spikes here and there and there and there. And it's only impacting in this case, if you only have one crack isolated to one tooth, then the distance from here to here, from there to there, from there to there, where the large spikes are, will be one revolution. Every time this crack rolls and impacts the mating gear, you'll see a pronounced spike going on. All right, and it goes many very high G levels. All right, so there's no response at all in 1 times gear RPM. There are some unfortunately, diagnostic charts out there that tell you for cracked or broken tooth, you'll see the problem at 1 times RPM of the gear with a problem. That is not true. You cannot see a cracked or broken tooth with a spectrum. Okay, so now we're going to go with some case studies to finish today's webinar. All right, here's one that I just talked about him, a cracked tooth or a broken tooth on a pinion. We're going to go right on into this guy right here. Okay, we've got a broken gear tooth on a 400 RPM vacuum pump gearbox, the motor, the gearbox, and the vacuum pump. And the problem is right in here. Okay, so with that gearbox, what are we seeing? This is data taken right on the gear. And first off, we have a spectrum. Now we're looking at the spectrum in vibration, velocity on this axis, and frequency on this axis. Well, let's roll up and let you see what we saw. Now this has a real problem. The overall level is 0.19 inches per second. If you've done vibration for any time, you're like, okay, 0.19 inches per second. That's a peak level, by the way, right? Now let's look at the actual frequencies. Here's your 1 times RPM. Say it again. Here's 1 times RPM, 0.005 inches per second. It barely even is it's barely vibrating at running speed. Then you have the vacuum pump itself, the blade pass frequency, number of blades times RPM, low levels. The gear mesh frequency. Gear mesh frequency is unaffected. Oh, totally unaffected by what you see with a cracked or broken gear tooth. So what will we evaluate from this thing? Well, the spectrum says it's okay. Now you want to take a look at it, because if you're an experienced analyst, you see all this information right in here. You're saying that looks kind of squirrely, and you're right, it does. But does it jump off the page? Does it let you know there's a cracked or broken gear tooth? No. All right, this does. This is the waveform, amplitude versus time. All right, and notice from here to there, from here to there, from here to there, from here to there, these little cursors that are put in place to let you know that this is occurring once per revolution all throughout every single time one gear impacts another. You see this impact in the waveform, and it's very pronounced. What your waveform should look like is this guy right here. You see where my cursor is going, it should look like that. And in reality, it does not even resemble it. Once per rev, we're getting this tremendous impact. This is causing very high levels in amplitude. Sometimes these are 50, 60 Gs, all right? And yet, everything, as far as the spectrum is concerned, what did it say? Everything's fine. Well, it wasn't fine. What is the problem? Let's take a look at it. Well, by the way, the secondary impacts. This is telling you that it's occurring not only at once per rev, but you also see intervening things, letting you know that this problem is not isolated to just one tooth. It's actually spread out to other teeth. Once you start looking at waveforms, you'll be able to see that. Here's a photograph of the actual gear with the problem. This is the pinion. Had broken teeth on the pinion, and it created a lot of heat, so much heat that we had plastic flow that spread not only to the one gear, to the one tooth, that is the one tooth, but also went into this tooth and went tooth and that tooth. So it had 4 teeth side by side by side that were, and not only that, by the way, it now took its problem and shared it with the mating gear. It hadn't broken it yet. It hadn't caused broken teeth, but it did have a problem with the pinion. That should have been caught in the beginning. It wasn't. Okay. Instead of a $75,000 repair for bearings and gears, just the gears themselves, the whole gearbox had to be replaced at a 1.48 million cost, $1.48 million cost, not including the downtime. This is just parts and labor. That's it. The whole gearbox had to be replaced. So it's about 20 times as expensive as it should have been if we looked at waveforms. Here's before and there's after the gearbox replacement. Big difference, right? So let's look at something else. This is on a bearing. This is on a 359 RPM pinion. It's not low speed, really. It's a moderate speed pinion gearbox. Now, if you look at it, if you look at the spectrum looks good. We're getting slight wear of the bearing, slight wear. Gears look good according to this, okay? Now let's look at the waveform. And here at the waveform, we're seeing 37 Gs. Now come down here. The slight bearing wear would only show about 0.5 to 1.0 Gs in the waveform. All right, we're looking at the waveform right here. The distance from here to here is not one revolution. It's the outer race frequency, okay? From there to there, and from there to there, and from there to there. It keeps repeating itself. That's important. It's keeping repeating itself. This is called a periodic waveform. It's repeating. You know what the problem is. What is the problem? It's a bearing. And is it bad? It's very bad, okay? Significant bearing wear, 37 Gs. What should it have been? 0.5 to 1 G. Instead of that, it's anywhere from 37 times to 74 times higher than it should be. all right? And you see that in the waveform. Here's the proof. And the pudding shows that, the bearing is badly spoiled. Here's where the crack initiated, and then it propagated all throughout the entire outer race, which damaged the inner race too. We're just showing you the worst part of the bearing itself. And because this bearing problem, it caused problem with what it was supporting, which in fact was the gear. The gears were also damaged, but the bearing was totally gone. Okay, so after replacement, the bearing dropped, the amplitude dropped from 37 Gs down to 0.89 Gs, a little bit over 40 times lower. That's from the waveform. Okay. Now we'll look at this lubrication problem. This will be the last one we have today that we can share. I would like to show you more, but this is as far as we can go. All right. But we had a lubrication problem with it. And this allowed friction and metal-metal contact, which is a no-no. And this impacting caused slight bearing faults. Okay, slight bearing faults, and all samples were taken. So let's go take a look at it. We're looking at the highest peak in the spectrum is about 5.6 Gs. From looking at something called peak view, it's a high frequency enveloping technique, peak view. And in peak view, we're looking at the spectrum, and it says not too bad. Okay, not too bad. And you look at the waveform. Well, there's no bearing or gear problem. No, wait a minute. No bearing or gear problem. Wait a minute. Let's look back real quickly. That would be a bearing problem. And if it's a gear problem, it would be from there to there, from there to there. We would see in the waveform that we have a problem with a gear, like a crash and gear tooth in that case. But instead, we have all kinds of peaks that are all kinds of, shouldn't call them peaks, they're spikes in the waveform. And what we're saying right here is that it's difficult to read this waveform because there's no things that keep occurring in the same time. For this, from here to there is one revolution. From there to there is one revolution. If this spike occurs here, he's got to occur right in the same place there and there and there and there, and he's not. Can't make heads or tails out of this thing. Yeah, but wait a minute, we can. 274 Gs. 274 Gs, 50 times higher than was seen in the spectrum. Something bad is wrong. What is that something? Well, we did another measurement that's called autocorrelation. I won't go into it right now, but it's what it is a measurement of how repeating are the frequencies that are occurring. And autocorrelation will look for things that are truly repeating to have something called an autocorrelation factor greater than 0.5. All right. Our autocorrelation factor is less than 0.05. What does that tell you? It means that whatever's going on is not repeating. Okay, why is that problem? Why is that telling you something great? Because it's telling you that you strongly suspect not a bearing, not a gear, not an imbalance, not misalignment, not a looseness, not any of these things that are going, they might be going, but the big problem is this thing has a major lubrication problem, all right? Lubrication fault, all right? All samples were next taken. We found 80 to 100 micron wear debris, 80 to 100 micron. So this thing was badly, badly damaged, all right? So then we compared it with a good. Once this thing was replaced, this thing dropped from 274 Gs down to 2.24 Gs. Far better condition. And I'm going to have to wrap things up here. So I'm going to have to jump to the very end of this presentation and let's look at the seminar agenda when we actually have a 3-day seminar and time to truly go into this thing, and for Jim Berry not to be talking so fast, or any other instructor that happens to be teaching. And the time waveform, we'll be looking at what is a waveform, and just like we did with you guys already. We'll look at the required setup. We didn't have time to go into the setups. Then we'll look at we'll look at a lot of things that you see in front of you now, all right? And we'll say that we also look very closely at the examples of the faults that are detectable by time waveform analysis. Each and every one of them are covered. And we look at the setups. We look at real world case studies like the Dickens. It's just populated. As all our seminars are for the last 40 years. We've been doing vibration analysis, and we've kept our information current. So what we see is as far as waveforms. What are we looking at? They should be required on every point with every machine that allow you to see problems you would not see otherwise. They allow us to see and better evaluate how severe the only true amplitude is the waveform, not in the spectrum, right? They also add confirming evidence to other problems from other tools like vibration spectra, motor current analysis, ultrasound, oil analysis, etc. So are you requiring time waveforms at each point? If not, please consider doing so. And you'll be glad you did. I'll tell you what, you'll be glad you did. And so your customer, that is, if you're a consultant like us, Or if you're in a plant, you'll be glad that you did because your customer happens to be the maintenance department, okay? And also those who are paying the bills. All right, so if you want to learn more, in 2024, November 5 through 7, we'll have a time waveform analysis, 3 days in Charlotte. And also in 2025, February 18 to 20, you get to go to Myrtle Beach. November 4th through 6, Charlotte, North Carolina, back to Charlotte, okay? One other thing I want to mention before we to complete the webinar today, there's something that's phenomenal that started about a year ago, actually a little bit more than a year ago, called the Technical Associates Excellence Community, the TAEC group. Okay, we have a good mission statement, and it was formed to bring workforce development. And one of our main goals here is to combat the skills crisis. And there's a major skills crisis that's hit our entire nation, in fact, our entire world, particularly after COVID in 2020 and 2021. And it's hitting very badly. People are retiring. They're with 30 to 40 year employees, they're retiring and they're not being replaced by people that have that same skill and knowledge of how to truly repair machines, reliability people, there are reliability engineers, and those are involved with condition monitoring programs. That's just not happening. So one of the things we have that we want to do and that we've had put together is the Technical Associates Excellence Community. In September 13, we'll have a webinar, and that's for each of you guys. All right, we're going to have someone very renowned throughout the nation, Adrian Messer. He's with SDT Ultrasound Solutions, and he's given a tremendous presentation on rethinking reliability and how culture change can drive shareholder value. It's a fantastic presentation, very meaningful, that will be given. And again, he's one of our chief people on our board that's helping us spread the good news about TAEC and what we're all about. In November, we'll have our second webinar, and we'll be given details later on. In January 2025, we're going to have it's our first annual reliability event, and that's a good one. It's going to be a major one in which we have speakers that will be on some topics of great interest to our folks. And finally, any questions? I'll give it back to David at this point. And if you have any questions, please jot those down in the chat box. Okay, David.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dad. Hopefully y'all were able to listen fast. No, but did a great job there. I know there's a lot of information, as you can tell. The waveform is fairly important, so lots of good data that can be pulled from it. And I like to usually say that you can get what's wrong from the waveform and how bad it is from the spectrum is kind of how I like to break it down sometimes. So, so if you have any questions, I know we're coming up to time. But we can stick around for a little bit. If you've got some questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We'd be glad to answer a few of them. Or you might be able to unmute yourself. I'm not sure what the size of this meeting today but if you have to jump off, thank you so much for coming today and for just joining us and seeing what you can take away from this. And I can't remember if we said or not, this is being recorded, so we'll definitely post this as soon as it is done. Finalizing and everything. So thank you so much for joining. And if you have any questions, just let us know right quick. Looks like we have one person there. Let's see. I think you've been unmuted there. Go ahead, Mohammed.
Hi, James. It's 2:30 in the morning in Australia. Right? I'm just sitting. Just sitting here to see you. Got heaps of benefit from your books before in my career. And yes, it's a good to start with the time waveform analysis. And years ago, like in 2006-7, when I started in this field, and it helps. It benefits shapes in my condition monitoring career to read through the documents you have. And yes, I would second that the commentary you have around the time waveform analysis. Like if you are not doing it, do it, and if you are doing it, you will glad you did it. So just wanted to resonate that thought. Thank you.
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Thanks for waking up this morning to join us.
Yeah, 2:30 in the morning. How about that?
On the weekend too, I guess. It's already Saturday. Well, thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Anybody else have some questions? All righty. I don't see anybody else raising their hand to ask a question, and lots of people thanking us in the chat there. So again, we do appreciate you taking some time today to join us. We look forward to seeing you again in September for that webinar for the TAEC. In the meantime, feel free to reach out to myself or anybody on the TA team. You can get our contact information off our website. We just thank you so much for joining, and y'all have a great weekend.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Mohammed.